Nobody likes being ignored and left out or just left behind. And so many people with childhood PTSD have it because of these experiences when they were small. Now, maybe your parents were alcoholic or addicted and turned off like a light switch when it was time to give you attention and support. Or maybe one of your parents died or was locked up or just left you like you never existed. And not only was this terrible to happen to you as a kid, to any child, but it can really muck up your adult relationships with anxieties and longings that can really drive away any possibility of genuine, stable connections with people, romantic or otherwise. Abandonment wounds push you into relationships too quickly. The slow pathway, that just wasn't even encoded in your nervous system, but I promise you, you can learn to do it with some techniques, and I do teach that. But when you were a kid, you didn't learn the slow way. And then when you find yourself attached to someone you can't stand or who treats you badly, you may feel like you can't leave because your abandonment triggers kick in and make it feel like leaving would be almost worse than dying. So you go in too fast and then you can't leave. That's how people get stuck. And abandonment wounds can also show up in group dynamics where, I'm willing to lay money on it, you've had horrible experiences of being ostracized, left out, judged by peer groups. And I'll talk about that in this video too. I'm going to talk about why these wounds are so hard to observe in yourself when you kind of flip out on someone because your abandonment wounds get set off. It's like you're not even yourself. And the desperate and sometimes overly intense reaction to feeling abandoned, even when it's just a feeling and no one has actually done it to you in that moment, it's almost like a bad dream. What it actually is an emotional flashback, which is normal with CPTSD. An emotional state from the past comes back and overlays your present time experience. Someone walks out of the room when you're trying to talk to them, and this tsunami of desperation and grief can come over you. That's an abandonment wound. And next thing you know, you're calling them names, you're threatening to leave, you're crying, it feels like your life is over. That's what we call abandonment melange. That's a word Pete Walker contributed to the literature, and it's such a good concept of the intense grief and rage and panic that can come over people when the feeling of abandonment happens, and it's drawing through this emotional flashback on what happened to them as a kid. And I want to talk about why that happens and how emotional injuries that happen before you even had language show up like that as just overpowering emotions that aren't connected to present day circumstances. And you don't even know where they came from, but they are upon you and they feel real. So let's just go over some common triggers that you see in people who were abandoned as kids. The really valuable thing about looking at triggers is that everything that is a symptom of CPTSD only occurs if it gets triggered. And that includes, the neurological dysregulation, disconnecting from people, going into self-defeating behaviors of lashing out, running away, smoking, there's so many self-defeating behaviors. But all of that sort of calms down. It goes dormant like like chickenpox virus if you're not getting triggered. So you can't stop the world from triggering you, but you can learn to calm how you respond to triggers once you know what they are and you have the tools. So let's talk about some of the triggers that can really get you when you have abandonment wounds. One of them is when somebody walks out of the room, if they storm out when you're in the middle of talking. This is a really normal thing. There are some people, including some people with CPTSD, but all kinds of people, when a conversation gets intense, how they sort of self-regulate is they get physical distance for a minute. So they might stroll out of the room for a minute. Now, this is really different than saying, that's it, it's over, and they leave and pack a suitcase and they're out the door. But even that can be the same impulse, the same coping mechanism to flee. So somebody who is actually in the relationship and will come back in the room in just a few minutes sometimes walks out of the room and just goes, oh gosh, I just can't deal with this conversation. For a person with CPTSD, that can be so triggering. It brings back some memory that you don't even have anymore. When you didn't have words, like before the age of 3 or so, you can't really form memories. And so all you remember is the emotion. You can't remember the event. But it's not uncommon in people who grew up in unstable households where there was fighting or addiction or, trauma going on, that would have happened, that your needs would have been neglected, that you would have cried for a very long time in a wet diaper. And that's where these wounds come from. So it's not going to come back as, this reminds me of when I was crying all alone. Like, you won't have that memory, but you'll remember the feeling. And the feeling comes up, and since it's not attached to a cognition of what it was, of what the memory is, it just feels like it's happening right now. And you just think, this terrible person who's making me feel this way, I have got to shut down this relationship. Then, if you have typical CPTSD that wants to do that, that has that reaction to things, maybe an hour later, when you start calming down or when you start going into dissociation and the emotions are calmer, then your emotions come back and you go, oh dear, what have I done? Oh dear, what have I done? If you have the kind of CPTSD I have, you've probably done that before. You may have ruined relationships with it before. All right, similar to that trigger is the silent treatment. Now, the silent treatment, there's minor forms of it where somebody's just like, I'm not going to talk about it with you. And then there's one where, somebody living with you or all the kids at school, they turn their back and they won't talk to you. They shun you. They refuse, there's stonewalling where I won't talk about it. And then there is the silent treatment. And either way, this can be extremely triggering for somebody who was rejected or neglected as a kid. We can't control what other people do, but I would say the silent treatment is emotionally immature. It's not a good way to handle conflict with somebody. And at the extreme, it can be emotional abuse. So I don't recommend doing it or staying with people who keep doing it and don't intend to change it. All right, a third trigger that really gets people who were abandoned as kids is waiting, having to wait for somebody. Now, maybe you were a kid who got left in daycare until the last minute or even later, or your parents were separated and you sat by the window all of Saturday afternoon waiting for your dad to come and pick you up for his time with you and he didn't show. Waiting and not having your needs met is a big thing that can cause CPTSD in the first place. So a lot of people who have this wound, any kind of waiting does it. And the thing is, when it happens, because it's triggering CPTSD, it simultaneously triggers kind of a fog where you go, I think I'm freaking out about getting stood up for this person who said they would come. And then your mind plays a trick and goes, well, it's probably my fault. It's probably just me. And maybe, should I be mad about this? And I get a lot of letters from people where they're like, is it just me? And so sometimes I or our community come in, in the membership community that we have, people can pose those questions in our secret Facebook group, like, is it just me? Or when this guy said he would call me this weekend for the plan and then he didn't call and I waited all day, is that bad? And everybody can go, yeah, that was bad. Maybe some people don't mind being treated like that, but you do, and it's not a happy thing. And it's not a good sign for a relationship. And if it's something that you don't have a boundary around, I have good news for you. You can make a boundary around it. And then future people won't get very far with you if they treat you like that. All right, number 4, feeling jealous and getting gaslit about it. Now, I think this happens a lot when you're dating, that you break up with somebody and then they say, we're just going to be friends, right? Let's just stay friends. And you think, oh yeah, I should do that. That's what people do. And then you have to watch them eventually get together with somebody new and pretend like you're the cool girl, but you're actually jealous and you have to pretend you're not jealous. Anything where something feels terrible to you, but you have to pretend it's not terrible is putting you in danger of like dissociating. And this is something that's been very hard about the age of division that happens over social media, is that people can do terrible things and say terrible things and you can't defend yourself, because if you do and you say anything, you could get attacked by trolls, you could get canceled. We have thousands of people who are going into their CPTSD because they can't speak up, and when people just make up stuff about them. And it's terrifying. It's horrible. And it is a form of narcissistic abuse when people do that to each other. So if you grew up with parents who were neglectful, and for all the reasons they get neglectful, because, they have personality disorders, they're drunk, they're high, they're totally selfish. If that's what was happening, you got told all the time, you got treated badly, and then you're like, oh, get over it, or oh, stop being such a worrywart, or oh, you're just, you're being so old-fashioned. I got that all the time as a kid, and I was very sensitive about it until I learned to calm those triggers a little better. But I can't stand it when I know very well that something bothers me and I'm shamed for being bothered. Now, like everybody else, I've had to be in situations and jobs where something really bothered me and there was nothing that could be done about it. You know, having a boss who didn't think that I was valuable enough to promote. So some of these things, it's life, it's where it is. And when that happens, you know, if you're an autonomous person, it's time to change jobs, for example, or you're dating somebody. But I wanted to get to this thing where you get gaslit in present time, right? You're dating somebody and they want to hang out with their ex and you're supposed to be cool about it. You're getting gaslit. Like, what's the matter? Why are you so jealous? You just have jealousy. Jealousy is how people feel when they have an expectation of loyalty or monogamy and they feel threatened. And yes, I totally have met people where the jealousy is just kind of rampant. It's not really tied to reality. That can happen, but it's also something that is natural. And if you've been told, like, you don't get to hold out for that, you actually don't have to agree to be an ex's buddy, and you don't have to agree to be okay dating somebody who hangs out with their ex. You get to actually have your boundaries about that, and you get to maybe test out, okay, I think I'm okay with it, and then you're like, I'm not okay with it, actually. And you get to not be okay with it. Don't kid yourself. Don't try to pretend you're somebody you're not, because that can just bring on the old trigger of being abandoned. It is a huge abandonment trigger to be afraid that somebody's going to leave you. And there's part of that that's just baked into relationships, especially in the early stages, especially when you're young. Like that's part of it. But how you can keep yourself healing and intact as a person with CPTSD is to be very clear with yourself about what your boundaries are about that. And to go very slowly in relationships so that you can refrain from attaching too strong before you know if this is somebody who matches you in terms of what you need and expect out of the relationship. Another trigger for people who are abandoned is empty time when there's nothing scheduled. You may find yourself, maybe you overfunction, you fill up all your time. You do frivolous socializing just because the thought of being on your own for an evening just makes you kind of anxious. Maybe a lot of feelings come up. So here's what's really great about the path of healing from trauma is it involves tools that help you make the most of the feelings that come up. So it's actually very fruitful sometimes to be alone for an evening, even when you feel lonely. You sit down and you write your fears and resentments in the way that I teach. And a lot more is going to come up when you're feeling a little bit alone. Less will come up when everybody's waiting for you because everybody's going to go to the restaurant, right? You're going to be like, blah, 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 and go on. But when you're lonely, that can be a fruitful kind of loneliness, is to go ahead and face what's in there. And some of my most powerful experiences of healing have been on those really dark nights of the soul when I was feeling so alone. So empty time can be used very fruitfully for something, and that's healing. All right, number 6, closeness with loved ones can be a trigger. It's kind of ironic, right? It's like not having closeness is a trigger, but sometimes when people really show up and look you in the eye and they love you. And for this, I always think about when I was 15, my dad died of ALS. And a few months before he died, I had to travel from one state to another to visit him. And so the last time I saw him was 4 months before he died. And I will never forget, he was so sad when he said goodbye. He was standing in his driveway, smiling and waving and saying goodbye. And I wanted to run to him and just hug him. But the whole thing was so weird and uncomfortable, I just couldn't. So the intensity of his feelings, of his wanting to give me all that love for the rest of my life it was like a fire hose. It was like trying to drink out of a fire hose, and I couldn't deal with it. And it was a trigger for me. So I was, to have my dad die when I was still a youngster like that, it is a classic form of abandonment. He didn't do it on purpose. He never would have done it if he could have helped it. But first my parents got divorced, and then my mom moved us out of state. And I lost my dad in these stages. And it really, really affected me. And I have no doubt it affected how I approached relationships later. So I've still had time now to reflect on that love that I saw in his face and that I remember through his actions. And he wrote me a series of letters to let me know how much he loved me. He knew he was dying. We all knew. And I still have them, and from time to time I take them out, and it has to be very time to time. It's so intense to have somebody give you a lifetime of love like that in a letter. And I'm very grateful I have it. I realize some people never even got that. But I thought I didn't get anything, and then later I recovered in the letters, and I realized he sort of encapsulated his love so that when I was older I could get it. And it even says that in one of the letters. I'm writing this down because I think when you're older it will make more sense to you, and you'll be able to appreciate it. And he told me what his work was, what he actually did at work, and told me some stories from his childhood. So it was really great because there just wasn't time. I never got to know him as an adult. And I'm way older now than he was when he died, which is funny to think. And I still miss him. Yeah, still miss him. So, all right, number 7 is watching other people enjoy social ease. Like, why didn't I get the memo? You got triggers installed instead, right? So it can be a trigger for your abandonment when you see other people just not being so effed up in social situations and comparing yourself or imagining that they're okay. One thing I've learned over time is people don't always feel as at ease as you think, but some do. It's true. Some are just like, la la, everything's great. I'm confident. I feel like I fit in everywhere I go. Well, I don't. That's not how I feel. And so sometimes watching them, I start to compare myself, and then I go into the abandonment thing. I'm going to get left out. I just know it's coming. I'll take myself out preemptively. Did you ever do that? I did. All right, another trigger can be seeing other people happy, and you feel like you should be happy. There's no reason you aren't, but you're not happy. You feel shame or ostracized, or you just know in your bones you're never going to fit in. Sometimes, though, you are ostracized because of something about you. Maybe you're prickly. Maybe you don't contribute enough. Maybe you have a vibe that's very stressed out or angry, right? And you might be in a state of confusion about why this is. You think, oh, these other people are terrible. Sometimes people actually are terrible and you just haven't had enough healing to choose people that are great, that you feel good with. Sometimes you go into blame, like you just don't feel okay in yourself, and your reflex is to blame other people. And people have nervous systems, so no matter how polite or kind your words are, if you're feeling kind of like with other people, they feel it, and you will find people pulling away. And that has been a lot of my experience in life, where if I were to ask people, how come I'm not included? Not that I did, but if I did, they would have just said, I don't know, you're included. I don't know what you're saying. But I just didn't have a very inviting demeanor. I wasn't positive about getting together. I almost was looking for a way to get left out because I felt so triggered by the whole question of whether I was going to be included, you know? And so when you're healed, you have a little bit more like latitude you get those fears and resentments on paper about that could happen or has happened. And then you just kind of like give it your best shot. And you just go, hey, do you want to hang out? Or, hey, can I tag along? And then you only have to like feel terrible and embarrassed if you know, and you still don't have to feel terrible and embarrassed, but they could actually reject you. But that's almost never what's going on. So we work on ourselves, and then we work on being free enough to express ourselves and ask for what we want. There's always a component of working on ourselves so that we can be, you know, nice, good people that people want to hang out with. And that's not a given for everybody with trauma. So I'm kind of talking about how a history of abandonment leads to a present day feeling ostracized. And it is so hard to be ostracized. It does happen for real sometimes. Sometimes there is an overlay. You know, sometimes people really are just being wicked. Sometimes your trauma wounds are kind of adding to it, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But for ostracization, a trigger is being in groups at all, like just believing I don't belong, I never do, I'm uncomfortable, I'm triggered, I didn't get the memo, I don't like these people, they're also stuck up, they're also perfect, they're also normal, you know, whatever your judgment is. It's not a friendly vibe, right? Second one is feeling overlooked, right? Did you ever do this? When you were in school and you raised your hand with an answer and somebody else got called on, and then you go, oh no, I wasn't raising my hand. It's this weird shame that some of us feel about like offering ourselves and then getting overlooked. It's like shameful or something. If you stand outside of it and you just think of a little kid raising her hand in class, it's okay. Not everybody can get called on. And so you may have learned, don't raise your hand. Just sit there and act like you don't know the answer either, which is a way to take yourself out of the mix preemptively so you never have to feel ashamed about not getting called on. And this can be applied to jobs and relationships and friend groups and family stuff. And so it really takes a lot of courage to just put yourself out there for what you want afterwards. All right, another trigger, feeling judged, not accepting yourself. You know, if you're feeling judged by other people, I can almost guarantee you have a component of not feeling okay yourself about what you're doing, who you are. And your first order of business is always going to be to work on that, to work on yourself. All right, here's another one. You know you don't belong, but what happened was you were just crap fitting with this group anyway, just so that you could have people to hang out with. And isn't it funny how you can do that sometimes and just be like, I don't like these people, I don't fit in. So there you have it. You know, when you hang out with people just to use them to fill up your time, that can happen. Number 6, feeling condescended to. That comes from fearing you're not enough, that you don't know enough. And yes, some people are very condescending. Ugh, and it's a trigger. It's a trigger I really don't like. I don't like, you know, when people assume that I don't know something and they explain it to me, and it happens all the time. And I used to get very prickly and want to tell them, look, I know that, I know. And my healing at this stage is I don't even bother. I'm just like, all right, thank you. Because I don't think it's very polite behavior, but I don't feel like taking it on or getting into conflict with people. I just as soon, you know, carry on and keep all my self-regulation available for myself to use. So what can you do about these triggers? The world doesn't stop showing them to you. The one thing that can change is your trauma-driven response, where you shut down, you pull away, you lash out, or you avoid people and you avoid your potential as your only means to control the damage that happens when those responses get unleashed. But that's not great, right? You taking yourself out is you taking yourself out. You can heal your responses when you feel triggered, and even the abandonment ones. And it starts by learning to notice and calm those triggers. When you know what's happening, it stops feeling like it's just consuming you, drowning you. That it stops feeling so real, frankly. A little space appears where you see that you have a choice. If you grew up with parents who were unreliable, you may have ended up with strong triggers now in adulthood when people leave you waiting. When you've made plans, but they either don't show up or they don't get in touch until the last minute, and they leave you anxious and afraid with your emotions escalating every minute that passes. Do you have that? It's an emotional flashback, right? It's an old memory that sometimes doesn't even have an experience attached to it. It just floods in under certain triggers, like being kept waiting. And you may not even know cognitively what hit you, but someone leaves you waiting and you fill up with adrenaline, and then more adrenaline, because there's this fear that you'll act in an irrational, relationship-destroying way. Maybe you've done that before, like exploding with anger when the person finally shows up, or you'll rationalize your fears as just you being, you're just being crazy or insecure. And this confusion, whether someone is really awful and deserves your wrath, or whether you're crazy and should just stop, right? That confusion is very anxiety-provoking, and it's a trigger in itself. This is so very much what it's like to begin dating people when you have unhealed childhood trauma. It's a normal side effect, but of course we want to get some clarity and heal it. So I have a letter today from a woman I'll call May, and she writes, "Dear Anna, I've noticed that a major trigger for me is when it comes to planning or waiting on someone to inform me of plans or communication around plans. With some people, it flows really easily and I don't even think about it, usually with friends. But with other people who are less communicative, or friends who I'm not as close to, or they don't think that we're as close as I think we are," and then she clarifies that she's really talking about men she's dating, "it can become really debilitating if they don't do things a certain way that indicates they care about me." She says, with quotation marks, circling this, because I think she's calling herself a little crazy, but we'll get to that. Okay. "I have this idea that if someone found me to be an important and worthy person in their life, they would show that by being considerate and relatively reliable with communication and plans. I'm not saying this is correct, but it's just what I have noticed in my brain. Regardless of the trigger, in some cases it feels like a relatively reasonable request as well, meaning if someone says they will touch base tomorrow about evening plans and then doesn't text me till 6 p.m. that day, that feels borderline rude to me, like they are keeping me waiting around on them, and it must be a sign that they don't really respect or like me, for example. Maybe I'm off on that too, but that's just how it feels at the moment. I think this trigger stems a lot from my father, who, according to my mom, was often unreliable about plans. For example, making plans to come see me and my sister after my parents were divorced, and I was around 4 or 5 and lived with my mom. Then he would break the plans. He was also demanding of time and emotional connection with me, so I felt like I often had to do whatever he wanted when he wanted it, but was left in the lurch when I was hoping to rely on him for anything. I've seen this pain come up many times in relationships when it comes to how men create or follow up on plans with me. So I realize so much of this is a trigger, yet I also have plenty of people who simply seem like they generally want me in their lives. They communicate directly, or more often than not, reliable people. So I know it's very possible for me not to be triggered by this topic. So when someone triggers it, I'm not sure if that means they just don't value me and my time, and I'm reading my instinct correctly, or if I'm expecting too much from them too soon because of past trauma, especially with men, as I'm scared it could be the sign of an unreliable man who I'm afraid will be like my father, breaking plans and being emotionally unreliable, which I do not want. This can happen really early on before I even have enough of a pattern to really know for sure. With men, I feel terrified of checking in on them and asking for an update, as I would with a friend, for example, because I don't want to come across as triggered and scared. And then I find if I don't check in, I can get resentful when they do finally update me. It can go in a circle. Because of this, I'm curious. How and when do I communicate my needs to someone when I'm also aware there is a major trigger at play? I've never really known how to communicate my needs, if I even know what they are, because I fear I will sound demanding and manipulative. When I think I know one and it seems reasonable enough, for example, please don't leave me hanging all day about our plans, how do I do it in a way that doesn't accidentally become an unreasonable demand on someone because of my deeper trigger around it? Signed from May. All right, May, I'm so glad you wrote. I've got your back here, and I totally know what you're talking about. I think this is something a lot of us can relate to. Waiting has been a huge trigger for me. So let's go through again. All right. Major trigger around planning, waiting on someone to tell you of plans, and communication surrounding plans. With some people, it flows really easily, and I don't think about it usually with friends. With others, less communicative friends, and friends who may not think of me as being as close to them as I see us, or especially men I'm dating. Okay, hold on. Just as you're doing that, I'm hearing this bifurcation of people in your life. There's friends, there's people who are easy for you, and you mentioned you can just like text them and go, hey, when are we getting together? And then there's men, and there's this common characteristic with men. You're saying it's friends, but I don't know. It sounds like a bifurcation of types of relationship, and when a romantic relationship comes along, the trigger exists. Now, the question for you is, does it exist because you're just so triggerable, or does it exist because of the men you're allowing into your life? Okay, I hear you second guessing yourself a little bit about that. So let's see if we can zero in on what that is. I think a lot of people have that problem. Now, you said people who are not less communicative and who may not see me as a close friend as much as I do, and that it can become really debilitating for you if they don't do things a certain way that, quote, indicates they care about me. Now, when you put quotes on that, I think what you're doing is trying to admit that part of you sees that that's unreasonable. And I just want to tell you, actually, that's not unreasonable. I think what's unreasonable is that you think there's any problem with you wanting indications that the people you spend your time with care about you. Of course they should care about you and respect you and respect your time. So it becomes really debilitating if they don't do things a certain way. So I'm trying to guess, I'm sort of trying to read through the lines here. And I have known people who are overly insecure. It's like an insecure attachment trait. It's like, hey, are we getting together? Okay, are we still getting together? Because I didn't hear from you for an hour. Like, it's possible to go too far in that direction. But if people leave you waiting until 6 p.m. and don't tell you what the intention is, and they're sort of holding the key to the plan, I don't know. I wasn't there. Maybe it's not that big a deal. It's certainly not what a date does. Somebody who has asked you out on a date and who intends to be on a date with you does not want to leave you waiting like that or worried about it. They're worried that you're going to change your plans if they don't go in and, make a date with you. So here's what I'm intuiting is that the men you're dating are not fully dating you. And I would just, I'm sort of jumping cart ahead the horse here, but If you are dating somebody who leaves you anxious all day because you don't know what's going on, that sounds like it's not a date. And if you had mentioned, okay, so you said, yeah, I have this idea that if someone found me to be an important and worthy person in their life, they would show that by being considerate and relatively reliable with communication and plans. Hello, May. Yes, that's not just some idea you have, not some trauma belief. That's life. If someone likes you and respects you and values you, they will have a reasonable amount of communication and reliability. And then you say, here comes the second guessing. I'm not saying this is correct. Why do I get the feeling that someone has just gaslit the crap out of you about this, where you had to defend yourself, and where they go, oh, you're just, this is just something that you say. This is some trigger you have. You're so unrealistic. And you go, well, I'm not saying I'm correct. Like somebody, was it your dad, just planted in your mind that this is crazy for you to expect? That this is, what did you say, demanding? Oh dear, somebody has made you feel bad about yourself for expecting a normal, respectful interaction with people. Make plans, talk about it, feel safe and comfortable if you don't know what the plan is, to just text and say, hey, what time were you thinking we should get together? That's a totally okay thing to do. It's not a bad thing to do. And anybody who thinks that there's something wrong with you for checking in about what time they want to get together that night when you have a plan, anybody who would go running from you for doing that isn't a good boyfriend. They're not a good boyfriend. A good mate or friend is somebody who's just like, oh yeah, I wasn't sure. 5, 6, I don't know, what do you think? Or 6 o'clock, if we do that, we can get to the movie on time. So that's just normal communication. So May, I can just hear it, like somebody has planted this idea that you're damaged, and you've had to try to say, maybe it's just because I'm traumatized. So I want to read some of the things you said here. I'm not saying this is correct, it's just what I've noticed in my brain. You've noticed it because it's just common culture and common courtesy. Regardless of the trigger, in some cases it feels like a relatively reasonable request. Yes, there it is, you've zeroed in. It's not really you may have a trigger, and the trigger may make you very emotional when it happens and maybe paralyze your response to it, but it is a reasonable request. And you say, if someone says they'll touch base tomorrow about evening plans and don't text me until 6 p.m. that day, that feels borderline rude to me. No, it's not borderline rude, it's rude. It's rude. But, I think if you really are casual friends with somebody and you have a relationship that's solid enough that you're like, tomorrow, right? We're going to get together. Okay, let's check in. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And then they don't talk to you till 6, but you can trust them to have the plan. You're talking about people who have conditioned you to totally worry there is no plan. And I just want to challenge you, what you doing with people who put you in anxiety all day about whether there really is a plan? Here's what I think. I think you may have a trauma trigger about this, and I get it. I have it too. It's a lot better than it used to be. But I think even more than that, you have a crap fit wound. That's crap fit, where we get too good at learning to fit ourselves to unacceptable behavior and inappropriate people, that you were given a crap fit wound, that there's something wrong with you if you need to know what the plan is. Who does that except some I don't know, I can sort of get a feel for what your dad is like. Hey babe, I got to do my thing. You can't put, constraints on me, and, gee, women or whatever, somebody else's trip got on you. And I'm hoping that you can root that out, and you get to actually be you. You get to be someone who likes to know what the plan is. I know tons of people, they're sort of on a continuum. Some people, they're pretty loose about it. Some people want to know. I'm okay with all of it. And when I care about those people, I try to accommodate what helps them feel comfortable. And if somebody wanted to check in with me about the plan, I would never, ever think that was weird. Now, if they checked in 5 times or kept implying that I couldn't be trusted to do what I said I was going to do, yeah, I might take offense. But it doesn't sound like you're doing that, May. So you say, feels borderline rude, like they're keeping me waiting around on them, and it must be a sign that they don't really respect or like me, for example. Maybe I'm off on that too, but that's just how it feels at the moment. All right, this is where, so many of us get into gaslighting ourselves. I don't think you're off. When people leave you waiting and leave you anxious, and all day and don't talk to you, well, I don't know, May. It's like if you didn't text them during the day to let them know you wanted to know, maybe they haven't done anything wrong. Also, people who wait all day are at one end of the continuum. So if you keep finding yourself with people like that, and it sounds like you're really talking about men you date, I would just say, yeah, it sounds like the pattern that your dad put in you is active right now. As you heal from your childhood PTSD, you will have less and less of a draw towards people who match that sort of neglect of you, that mistreatment of you. You will lose that ability, that special crap fit superpower to just go, oh, they didn't show up and didn't call. That's okay. I'll blame myself. I'll pretend I'm crazy and that the problem is that I'm just so needy and that they're not really the problem. And that's how I'll make this whole thing work. And I mean, how many times have all of us done that? So many times. But that's how we end up in relationships that leave us in pain and feeling empty all the time. Okay, so you say, I think this trigger stems from my father, and your mom said he was unreliable. He'd just leave you waiting. He was very demanding of time and emotional attention. So that's a yucky combination. I hope that men aren't doing that to you, where they simultaneously blow you up, blow off plans with you, and then when they are with you, just demand a lot and drain your energy. You've seen this pain come up many times in relationships. Yeah, if it's coming up many times, yeah, it's probably just your core stuff. And you know what? It totally makes sense why you have that. It's not your fault. It's not your fault you have that. So you say you realize it's a trigger. Plenty of people simply seem like they generally want me in their lives. That's the kind of guy you want to date. He generally wants you in his life. They communicate directly. Very good quality in people. And more often than not, they're reliable. Yes, good quality for friends and partners. So I know it's very possible for me not to be triggered. You know, I'm sort of wondering if your trigger is at all the problem and not just who you're hanging out with. I'm not sure what it means if they don't value my time, or if I'm reading, if my instinct, if I'm reading incorrectly, or if I'm expecting too much from them too soon because of past trauma. I would just take off that clause because of past trauma, first of all. And stop, like you had trauma. Yeah. But the fact is you feel that way. The fact is that May's heart would like to be communicated with during the day so she can have peace in her day, knowing what time everybody's getting together. That is just a totally okay personality trait. There may be people who are looser about it, but not you. So just respect yourself. Respect yourself and be like, yeah, I need to know. So when somebody says on Saturday, so tomorrow I'll give you a call. Say, okay, what time were you thinking of getting together? Stand up for yourself in that way. Okay, you say, I feel terrified of checking in on them and asking for an update as I would with a friend, for example, because I don't want to come off as triggered and scared. Okay. Yeah, I understand that. You don't want to show the triggered and scared card like early in a relationship, even though you are triggered and scared. You're triggered and scared about it. That's how you really feel. But yeah, I get it, to put on a kind of like, to not put that on other people. But how you avoid getting triggered and scared is just to ask, just to say, can you, what time were you thinking? I can make plans for it if I know what time it is. Okay, so you get afraid to check in and you don't ask them and you leave it open, kind of giving them permission to not say. But then you find that if you don't check in, you get resentful when they finally do update you. And there it is. See, there's the problem. So for you, May, I'm just going to suggest, try this daily practice that I teach. See if you can get some of the feelings out on paper and just ask for them to be removed. Because what can happen when you do that and then rest in meditation is you just get a little clearer about what it really is. This dilemma of, is it me or is it them, starts to come a little closer together. And then you go, oh, it's them. Or sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's me. But that discernment of what it is there. And as you begin to heal as a result of getting freer and freer of the fearful and resentful thoughts that are kind of driving you to not be yourself, to deny how you really feel, what you really need, when you're denying that, of course you're resentful, but you're kind of getting resentful at somebody else because you denied it from yourself. The part that's hard to face is that people who treat you like that, like it's a little bit unlikely that they are secretly great people who are perfect for you. It's just that you haven't communicated your needs. It sounds more to me like you're letting people into your life who match your dad's neglect, and you're trying to fix yourself to make it work. That's what it sounds like. So I think the hardest thing to face is that when somebody you like isn't going to work out, and the right thing to do is to just end that relationship and make space so you can work on getting in touch with what's really important to you, what really makes you happy, what sort of a person you'd really like to find and fall in love with. that there's a really good feeling ahead of that act of severing that relationship. But when you were neglected by a parent, that abandonment wound can be just, as you said, debilitating. It can be debilitating. Very hard to make that decision. Very tempting to keep thinking, if I change, maybe I can make them change, maybe I can change myself. And there's this huge attraction to try to blame ourselves for somebody else's bad behavior. Because if it's me, I can do something about that. If it's their bad behavior and it does in fact indicate that they're not very serious about me, that is so painful to face because you can't do anything about it. If there ever was a chance that such a person would turn around and start respecting you, one thing that might bring it about is if you had boundaries around that and you just didn't, follow through on plans. So one thing I did when I was dating, and I did this when I was dating my husband, is I just set a quiet limit. I didn't tell him, but if he called me at the last minute, I wouldn't go out with him. I just wouldn't go out with him. I'd want to go out with him, but I knew that I needed to change my pattern of being, the girl you call at the last minute. And I wanted to save all my dating energy for somebody who was going to treat me better than that. So I picked a day, Thursday. If he called me before Thursday to ask to get together on the weekend, I'd be delighted to get together if I was free. But if he called me Saturday at 5, I just had plans. So true story, he called me at 5 on a Saturday once, and I was so lonely back then, and I was really into him, and I was hoping he'd call, and I wanted more than anything to hang out with him, but Thursday had passed, Friday had passed, Saturday day, and I was really disappointed and assumed he didn't like me. But then he calls at 5, my heart jumps. I'm like, oh, it's him. Oh, I wanted so bad to just abandon my plan here to act like somebody who respects herself. And I just didn't want to do it. I wanted to say yes, but I just followed through. I knew this was what I needed to do for me. And I just said, sorry, I have plans. Now, secretly, my plan was to just sit there and not be that girl. That was the plan. I just watched TV or something that night. The kids were at their dad's. I was free. I was just sitting at home alone. I was lonely, and I said no. And I remember he kind of went, oh, okay. He goes, well, how about on Tuesday then? And I said, yeah, sure, okay. So then I had a date. I had a date on another day. But his attitude towards me flipped in that one phone call where I said no. I just said no to last minute plans. So what you could do, May, if someone has really been disrespectful to you, is just say, oh, sorry, I didn't hear from you all day. I made other plans. And I know this will sound manipulative, but the other plan can be to just sit there in self-respect and write your fears and resentments and start getting free of this idea that you should hold your whole day hostage for waiting for some guy to call, right? That's a plan. That's legit. And who knows, maybe they'll come around or maybe they'll lose interest. If people are just kind of looking for a friends with benefits or a booty call type of thing, they're not gonna pass that test. But I've noticed that sometimes to fall in love, some of us have to have a boundary put before us that communicates that the person we're considering has this respect for themselves and requires that they be treated a certain way. And in my case, the person who mentored me kind of helped me to name what that would look like even before I had it. And I agreed, yeah, that's what it would look like. And so I just decided to act as if that was who I was. And I'm telling you, from that day forward, I got asked out in advance. And now we're married. It was a long road. It wasn't just like an instant thing. But the path to marriage started that day that I became self-respecting of my time and wouldn't just be the girl you call at the last minute when you don't have anything better to do. So I hope that helps you. The waiting thing is still a small trigger for me, but it's a lot less now because there are so few people in my life who give me that pain of making me wonder what the heck's going on. Think about this for a minute. If nothing ever triggered your complex PTSD symptoms, they would be very unlikely to be activated. Now, every time that you get triggered into some symptom, a panic attack, a migraine, feeling out of your body, feeling suddenly desperate or emotionally over the top, that is when CPTSD does its damage in your life. Now, it's bad enough what happened to you in the past, but continuing to re-traumatize yourself with triggered behaviors only makes things worse. So, for all the work you might have done in the past, exploring what happened when you were little, who did it, how it affected your life, that's all good for the long term. But there's this immediate benefit if you can learn to notice what triggers you right now and then to calm that triggered response. What happens when you have past trauma is, it gets triggered, you go into a trauma response. It's physiological, it's neurological. And once it starts, it's very hard to turn back. But if you can calm the trigger before the symptoms really get going, you just shut the door on your trauma-driven behaviors and they can't get in so easily, or that's the goal. Now, it takes practice. And by the way, if you think you have CPTSD, complex PTSD, the kind that comes from chronic ongoing stress, like for kids who were abused or neglected, you can learn about that. Check out the quizzes on my free tools page, linked below, down in the description section. For the next several weeks, I'm going to be talking about some common triggers, and you might want to be sure that you're subscribed so that you get a notification each time I publish a video about triggers. You hit subscribe, hit that little bell. And I'll be talking about triggers that often show up in people who have grown up abandoned or ostracized. I'll talk about triggers common in people who were raised in a controlling environment. And today I'm going to talk about triggers that show up in people who grew up in an out of control environment, where parents may have had alcoholism or addictions, or were for some reason very neglectful of the needs and the sense of order in the household, or disregarded your need for safety, for example. Now, how do I know all this? I grew up like that. That's the kind of household I come from. I come from a family where about half the members have a very active addiction, if they're still alive, and all the bad stuff that goes along with addiction and alcoholism. That's what my home was like when I was little. Now, things were totally out of control. It was a mess. There wasn't always food. There was violence sometimes. Nothing was predictable. It was hard to plan things like birthday parties. There was a 2-year period where we had no hot water. So like most kids, I just wanted to seem normal. I wanted to fit in, but I was ashamed of what was going on at home. So I worked overtime to try to fit in. And it affected me deeply, of course. And I used to think, that I was so good at sort of denying how bad it was. I just thought, I don't know, I'm just paranoid. I'm just too judgmental. These are the personality sides that were coming out from me early on, like in my teens. Judgmental, paranoid, kind of a scold. And my mom used to laugh at how I would kind of stress out in the car or worrying about future plans and things. And she would call me a worrywart. But I now know I was triggered a lot of the time for good reason. And the stuff that triggered me might not bother most people, but they were super normal for a person who grew up in an out-of-control home. Now, let me know in the comments if you resonate with the symptoms that I go over, or let me know if you have some of your own, all right? Number 1, triggered by loud noises. In the home where I grew up, there was a lot of breaking glass, shouting, banging, partying with loud music when I was little. Partying not by kids, by the adults. And I lived part of my childhood in a commune, and it was very, very out of control. In adulthood, especially in my 20s, before I had begun healing my trauma, I was really panicked by the feeling that, everything's getting crazy. I don't know, there's clothes coming off, things are getting loud. When I heard any noises like this, breaking glass used to make me practically fall down in a panic attack. It was so triggering. Angry voices, certain like hard rock music from the early 70s, I still don't want to hear it. It still just kind of brings back that yucky feeling like everything's just going to a very bad place. Second trigger, getting your sleep disturbed. When you're a kid in an out-of-control household, you end up going to bed way past bedtime because no one's paying attention. You could be on the sofa at a party or sleeping in a corner, and someone trips on you or sits on you, and that used to happen. And this is also how so many kids end up getting inappropriately touched. And to this day, when I get abruptly awakened in the night, that I feel it's not just a surprise, it's a feeling of being ready to fight. And luckily for my husband, this trigger is calmed a lot to the right size. Triggers that come up in your sleep are pretty hard to change. It's not like you're conscious. And I personally, it's when I wake up in the morning when I'm the most vulnerable to emotional flashbacks. But that thing where I get woken up in the middle of the night, I'm like, that's really calmed down. You do need a little vigilance, while you sleep, of course, but not like you did when you were a 6-year-old in an out-of-control household. All right, the third trigger common for people from that kind of home follows the first two, and it's just being around people who are high or drunk. I'm totally fine up to a certain point. I can't even tell you where it is exactly when people are intoxicated. It's like up to a certain point, I'm like, that's fine. It's not like I'm a teetotaler, but there's a certain sound in the voice of someone who is losing their composure on substances. There's a smell they give off that I'm really tuned into. It comes off on their breath. It's a sick smell that lingers in the bathroom after they pee, which I think is associated with a strain from all the alcohol on the kidneys. My mom had that. And so at a very young age, I started, if the bathroom had that weird smell in it, I would immediately feel like really anxious. And that was astute. There really was, things were getting very bad right there. My little child brain got tuned into clues like that things are getting crazy. And to this day, people partying can sort of cross a line where I feel really triggered and like I need to get control over my environment. It's like a feeling that comes. Number 4, I've got a similar trigger, and this is with people doing sexual things in public. So our commune in Berkeley in 1971 had a lot of that, and it was really upsetting for me. I was, 8 at the time, and that goes hand in hand with the drugs and the alcohol and the loudness and, just feeling like nobody's paying attention to safety, order, or anything like that. So to this day, I'm just not that comfortable. I did a very early blog post about finally just deciding when everybody goes to some hot tub and gets naked, I just don't want to. I don't want to. I'm old enough, I get to not do that. So that's for me. Okay, number 5 is speaking up. Do you get triggered when you speak up about something, sharing an idea, or even harder, saying when something is bothering you? Because if you grew up in an out-of-control household, speaking up was very likely to get you, not heard, right? You could get laughed at, you could get ignored, you could get yelled at, you would be attracting attention that would, whatever the bad thing that happens to kids in your house would start zooming in on you when you spoke up. So the price feels too high. It's triggering even to, think I want to say something sometimes. Do you ever get that? Have you had to overcome that in adulthood? Number 6 is the opposite. When you don't speak up, holding in the thing that needed to be said can just totally poison your thinking too. Your emotions, your body. Sharing your feelings and stating what you like or don't like, or expressing your needs, or, setting a boundary, or just normal parts. That's just normal. It's part of being in a family or a relationship. So if it wasn't safe for you to do that, you may have developed a habit of either hiding how you feel or distorting how you feel so it would come out some way that you thought would be acceptable. But of course, even if they listened to you, you wouldn't get what you needed because it wasn't what you needed. Or you try not to feel it. Like, if I can just not need anything, then everything will be okay. So don't worry, Mom. I'll be good. I don't need anything. A lot of us ended up with that. Then comes number 7. And you know how intoxicated or out of control parents just love spontaneity. Well, planning is not their thing. And maybe when you were little, you got dragged along on some very spontaneous car trips or sleepovers or homelessness episodes. And if you complained, people acted like you were this terrible, demanding little kid. I don't know, maybe I'm projecting on you, but that happened to me. We'd be driving in the middle of nowhere. We'd be in Mexico or something in the night without enough food or water or gas. And I'd be just freaking out in the back seat because we had this car that just broke down all the time. And they go, there she is again, she's a worrywart. But I was like, no, I was correctly anticipating there's going to be trouble. And so a lot of scrapes that we got into that were terrifying for me because I just fundamentally didn't trust that my mom or whatever grown-ups were with us were really paying adequate attention. Like, is there enough water? Is there enough food? Did we tell people where we were? Things that it's just been such a pleasure to grow up and find out you can totally take care of these things. And it's freed me up to travel again and to be a little more spontaneous. And I think there's probably still a trigger there for me. And the way you can tell is that when I take a trip, the amount of stuff that I pack on trips It's usually twice what I need, especially with food. I just end up with so much food, and that's something I've been working on. I just got back from England. I did the London show there, which was great. We took the long plane flight back the next day, and my husband and my sons were like calling me out and like, you always have this like plastic shopping bag. I had this like Sainsbury's bag. It's always something, and it's with all these like random leftovers from our time in whatever last Airbnb we were in. And snacks, like you can get snacks at the airport, but I grew up really poor. They're expensive. You should bring everything you have in the fridge. So I basically am toting like a fridge full of snacks, and most of it isn't going to hold up. The grapes just get all smushed, and one by one I'm handing it to the flight attendant every time they come around for trash, and they're like, there you are with your bag of inedible food at the end. I'm laughing now, and I was like, is that weird? And they were all three, they were like, yeah, that's weird. That's like your little OCD thing. I don't have OCD, but it's like a compulsion that I feel like, oh, you just never know. We might get stuck in the air and we won't have snacks. There is a practical element there. You should just bring the carrots that you had in the fridge, because you're not going to be able to get carrots on the plane. But I take it way too far. It's a trigger and a behavior that's come to light for me recently, enough that I'm laughing at it and I'm working on it, because it's also, I think, a little bit part of like food addiction of like, oh, there's not going to be enough, there's not going to be enough, which has been part of me overeating a bit all through my life and kind of, struggling with that. So we're going to talk more about food and weight and all that pretty soon in videos. Another reason to subscribe. Okay, number 8. Out of control parenting styles can leave a big trigger on you around getting stood up. You have a plan with someone and they didn't show up. And, after school care memories, anyone? When your mom or dad doesn't come or nobody picks you up and you're the last kid there, it feels terrible. Feels terrible. And I had a really debilitating trigger with this in my 20s. And I remember when somebody I was dating didn't show up when they said they would. And they actually were sort of being inconsiderate, but the level that I was freaking out was way out of proportion with that. They were like 40 minutes late, and this was before we could text each other or anything. They were 40 minutes late. I could survive the experience, but I would just sort of psychologically flip over into this physiological state, and it was a rage feeling. And this is where I talk about sometimes the emotions just like traveling down my arms. That was an early cue before I had validations that yes, a trauma response is physiological. I could just feel it going through my body, and I think, oh no, I'm just kind of going into that state where I'm not going to be pleasant the rest of this day no matter what. Like no matter how much I tell myself, oh, it's a good explanation of why he was so late, or I shouldn't get so upset about this. There was no turning back. There was no turning back, and I would just sort of be like this little, hedgehog with rabies, it's like waiting to bite. Couldn't get through it. So that is so much what my CPTSD was like for me. But now I know, yeah, it's a trigger. It's normal that I was triggered like that. It would bring up a feeling of just total loss, despair, panic. It went along with a pattern in my CPTSD behavior where I was choosing people who were going to stand me up too, which is what a lot of my videos are about, is how to choose better and then how to deal with the ups and downs of a relationship better too. Those two things together make a huge difference. But it's clear to me now, it's a normal trigger. I'm not so weird. That's what happens when your parents didn't care for you or pick you up consistently. All right, number 9, a trigger is that feeling that someone is lying or trying to manipulate you. So come on, get in the car, it's fine. It's a lie. Or eat the food that has mayonnaise on it that's been sitting out for 20 hours. Stop being so picky. That's a lie. Or you're upset, my God, everything with you has to be this big Greek tragedy. And yeah, I got told that. It's not a Greek tragedy. I was very upset about something that was happening, but I was manipulated into believing that the problem wasn't what was upsetting me, it was that I was feeling upset. And boy, does that carry on in your life and show up as what we call around here crap fit, right? Where you fit yourself to crappy behavior and crappy people and always blame yourself and see if you can just handle it better. Okay, trigger number 10, not doing anything. Just being idle. This is a big thing for grown-up children of alcoholics. It's pretty common. It's stressful not to be busy because, the feelings are always lurking on the edges of the day. And if you give up control and all that suppressed, anxiety, you just don't know what's going to come in and get you. And it's how a lot of us survived. part of healing is making peace with both downtime and being able to take it easy, and uptime where you need to step up and be productive. You got to do both. And this like swing between I can't do anything to I can't stop doing things could have a lot to do with vagus nerve activity, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. If one dominates or the other dominates, you can get very like overactive or, sluggish. So healing your CPTSD helps bring you to the middle of that, where you can be both calm, take it easy, step up, be active in a good ratio. All right, number 11, the 11th trigger, arguing in public. Whether you're hearing it or doing it, it is absolutely horrible in my experience. Just so much shame, so much shame. Have you ever seen someone or been in the car with someone who demands that you stop the car so they can get out right now in the middle of nowhere? I've seen that, but also I've been the person who wants to get out of the car. And it's a level of drama I hope to never go back to again in my life. But that's how intense the CPTSD symptom and the need to get away from the conflict can be, or to get out of the public arguing. And I teach techniques that you can use whether you're in the car, about to get in the car, or over on the side of the road when the car sped off because you insisted on getting out. I have the techniques that can help bring you back to center so that you can figure out what to do in a better way. And if you want to see that, that is my free daily practice course. It's down in the description section under this video and every video I make. I hope you come take it. If you take that free course, you can learn and try it in less than an hour. But the lovely thing is I'll invite you. I'll then send you emails and invite you to free Zoom calls with me. And we use the techniques together. A bunch of people come on the call each time, twice a month. And then you can ask me questions. You can actually talk to me directly about how it's going for you with the practice. So that's a good thing to try. All right, number 12, being in the car with somebody else driving. Yes, just driving, regular driving. Driving erratically is definitely a trigger, but just being there where you can't control the brake pedal. If you grew up with out of control parents, that can be a huge trigger. So have you ever had this where you're like one of your legs is really tired from being a passenger in the front seat and stamping on a phantom brake pedal? This is a classic metaphor for trying to gain control over an out of control situation. And of course, you have no control at all over a car that somebody else is driving unless you get out of the car, out of that relationship, or out of that phase in your life where CPTSD has you attached to people who scare you in the car at all. So, number 13, big trigger, birthdays and holidays, special occasions. Talk about a Greek tragedy. That's where my emotions come up. You're all grown up, but will the people in your life remember? Will they care? Will it be enough? I'm laughing at myself because I've just been through this so much. And finally, I have healing to the point that I can enjoy special occasions and extra enjoy it if people remember and do something nice for me. But I can just enjoy it because it's a special day to me. And this is kind of connected to the 14th trigger, which is times when you're supposed to get accolades, right? Congratulations, compliments, take a bow. It's so triggering for some of us because, again, it attracts attention. And so many times have you been let down when, you were in a school play and all the other kids got, their parents brought bouquets or something and your parents forgot to come, or they came, but they didn't bring the thing, or they just weren't in touch. And these can be small things or they can be big things. But that's definitely been a trigger in the past for me. And it's this weird kind of tension between fearing that you're a victim who isn't going to get enough, and then that you're getting too much attention and you're getting too much. It's just like it can't really hit the right spot. You're sort of not having the experience authentically. It's just tripping about like, how's everybody handling this? It's okay. That's a really normal way to be wounded after people did that. Their level of attention on you wasn't consistent. So far, my healing has allowed me to get a round of applause, or somebody, gets a profuse thank you from somebody, and I can just be glad and smile. Or I can not get applause and not really trip about it. It's so freeing to be just neutral and along for the ride of my life. And finally, one of the strongest triggers for people who grew up in out-of-control households where they got so little help is in adulthood when you have to ask for help. It feels so shaky and risky and shameful. and hard to define. Like, what do I even say? What do I even need? Like, we have so little practice, like putting that thought together. And I just often feel like a wobbly little lamp, that's about to come unscrewed from the base, and you have to keep propping it up. So can you actually ask? Is it too much to ask? Should you be able to handle this yourself? Could you, if you pushed yourself, handle it yourself? The cure for this trigger is sometimes to have something so bad happen that you have no choice. You have to be helped. And I had a breakthrough around needing help when I had a major surgery that involved, removing muscles from one of my legs to repair these other parts of my body. I had surgery everywhere. I couldn't walk. It was painful. And it was like 2 months where I couldn't totally take care of myself. And so a family member came and helped me, and it was horrible for me to have to keep asking for every single thing I ate and every time I needed the phone, but it was good for me, and it was good for my relationship with my relative. So the solution for having these triggers isn't to try to control the world, but maybe to get some boundaries around your world. Who you hang out with, who you don't, and to learn to calm your triggers so that all these decisions are no longer an involuntary reaction, but a choice. And if you haven't learned to calm those triggers, definitely come check out my free course. Thousands of people are taking it. It's something that I really love doing, is being on the calls with everyone and helping them refine their technique. And, we have all these paid courses and programs and coaching things you can join, but you don't even have to have a penny. You just have to have an internet connection, maybe a phone, to come join our Zoom calls. So I'd love to have you there. I've just had a very dysregulated week. And I wanted to tell you about it because I got hit with some of my very worst CPTSD triggers all at once. And I was able to pull it together and get my work done and basically take care of myself. But I got really thrown off last Sunday when I was riding in the car with my husband and son on the way home from Los Angeles. And we've been down there to do a live show. And I had a really happy time there. It was this last minute thing to do the live show there, and all these great people showed up, and I felt such love in the room from them and for them, and my heart was just wide open. And then on the way home, there's this 6-hour drive on this long straight highway between LA and where I live, and a really bad car crash happened just 6 or 8 cars ahead of us. And I don't want to get into too much detail. It's triggering even for me to talk about it. But basically a car that had been coming down the other side of the highway, like way across a wide median, came flying and flipping over and landed on our side of the highway. There were 2 lanes. And between the car and all the stuff that had been in the car, it just blocked the whole highway. Everything came to a stop. And it was nighttime. It was 6:30 at night. And after a minute, I couldn't really see what was going on. And after a minute, I got out of the car. I decided, okay, I'm going to go see what's going on. Some other people got out, and we went up there. And I ended up helping to move stuff off the highway. And then I had to make a decision, because I knew that on the side of the car that I couldn't see from the highway, which was, thoroughly shut down, we could stand there. But I knew that on the other side of the car, there was going to be some bad stuff. And so I went over there. And there were 2 people, and one was a woman who they were pulling out of the car, and one was a man who was on the ground. There were no paramedics yet. It takes, we were in the middle of nowhere. It took like 15 minutes for them to come. It felt like 45 minutes. It felt like so long. So I sat with this man who was conscious. He didn't seem to be critically injured. He could move his toes and everything. And I talked to him and just was like talking calmly to him and helping him to cope with what's happening. We had a blanket on him. And I'm not really sure what happened to his wife. It seemed kind of bad. It was a very serious situation. And I don't know if she made it. But I stayed until the ambulance came first for her, and then they took him, and I promised him I'd stay, and I did. And I'm glad I did. I think I was able to comfort him and bring calm right in this terrible, worst moment of his life. And when I got back to my car, I was basically in shock. And I got a chance to notice what that kind of trauma feels like in my body at this stage of my recovery. Like, I've had some bad stuff happen in my life, but thankfully not in a while. I have so much more healing, just kind of as a baseline right now. So I got to see what that's like. And I still get dysregulated, but I'm able to both experience dysregulation and kind of observe what's happening and why it's happening and what to do. So I thought I'd share with you 22 triggers that I still have that I'm aware of, and 4 of them were activated last Sunday when I was helping with that accident. So, all right. Number 1 trigger still for me is any kind of real life violence. And I think I'm not the only one who has that, but I saw that, I witnessed that in the accident, and it immediately kind of like threw me into a shocked state. I don't really have much of a problem like seeing it on television. If it's fictional, I go out of my way not to watch real life videos where bad things happen. I don't want to see that. It's very upsetting to me. Violence is a trigger. So that one kind of goes without saying. Number 2 is talking about my trauma. So when I got back to the car, I explained, the car was still back behind the accident, so they couldn't see what was going on. And I came back and explained to them what was happening. And I could hear my voice. I had this very weird, detached voice, very calm, that I sort of gotten stuck in from talking to this man for 10 or 15 minutes and using my voice to reassure and calm him. Everybody's working on this. We've got this. This is really good. They're helping her. The ambulance is coming. I see them now. And I couldn't stop talking like that. I was kind of stuck in this mode. Maybe I was doing it for myself. But talking about my trauma in any context is always risky for me and can get me very dysregulated. And I'll immediately start noticing symptoms of being kind of like out of my body. I was way out of my body for this thing. But in a weird way, because it was a crisis, I was like deeply in my body. I was dealing with stuff. There was a part of me that was just like not there for this. So at first I was just like really checked out and kind of talking in this way. But what happened was, for my husband and son, I don't think they really understood the gravity of the situation, that I think I just saw somebody die or come very close to death, and it was super traumatic. I mean, it was right there, and we were waiting and waiting for the ambulance, and that is such a prime condition for PTSD to kick in, a life and death situation. And I have like old stuff that's happened, so that got triggered, and I ended up like mad that they weren't more comforting and hugging me and going, "Are you okay?" But they didn't recognize it because I was acting so calm. So that's a form of dysregulation. So 3rd thing, when I'm not allowed to speak, or I'm silenced or ignored or not called on, that is a huge trigger for me. So in this one, because they didn't ask me, "How was that? Are you okay?" At first I didn't consciously get triggered by it, but I just got really checked out. I got very agitated, and they were like, well, as we continued driving afterwards, they're like, "Well, should we keep listening to the podcast?" And at first I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then I was like, "No, I can't deal with all this talking." And then I was angry that they weren't like talking to me more about it. And a friend was texting me and said, "Hey, how's it going? When are you getting home?" And I mentioned what was happening, and they're like, "Do you want me to get out to the highway and meet you and help you deal with this?" Like, they were so kind that it occurred to me like people could respond that way. And then I got really messed up. And that's the weird thing about me. Like, I can get very, very triggered by talking about what traumatized me. And then when I get validated when I talk about negative emotions, later in the week, another friend, I left a recording, we talk on Marco Polo, and I left this recording about what happened. And I think it was a very kind of heavy, thoughtful, honest, this is what happened. And then she left me back a recording, and it was this really lengthy, considerate recounting of what I had told her with these validations kind of added in. And I got really dysregulated. And at first I was like, why is she doing that? And I was using my tools, my daily practice, to start going, don't people know? Like, you shouldn't validate me when I'm feeling bad. But of course, that's what loving people do. That's what loving people do. And it's really hard for me to receive that for whatever reason, because of the way I'm wired or the way I was brought up. But when people validate, like, sometimes I want to say what's bothering me, and then I just want to like put it in a box, And if people start commenting on it, it just like really triggers me. One thing that always really worked for me is being in 12-step meetings where people don't comment on what you said. And I, did a lot of my growth in that environment where I could say honestly what was going on and nobody would comment. And that felt really safe to me. So, something to consider. Maybe you're like me. I'm not saying it's the only way to be or the right way to be, but it's definitely how I am. That I sometimes need space from people commenting on what I said, and then I'll get mad if it wasn't what I wanted. Go figure. But it was a bad situation. It was very traumatic, so I forgive myself. All right, so I told you that the big four happened for me in that accident, but I got to thinking, like, what are the other ones that are still really hard for me, just to share with you about it. Okay, one of my big triggers is, and when I say trigger, I mean it triggers dysregulation. Like people use trigger to just mean it makes me angry or, it makes me want to fight with you. But I'm talking about like it triggers neurological dysregulation to the point that I sometimes can't feel my hands or I can't really like process information very well or it's very hard for me to focus afterwards. Like I still struggle with neurological dysregulation. When certain triggers happen. And so I'm no longer like trying to control the world on my triggers. I'm learning to calm my triggers so that the world can just be the world and I can move freely and people don't have to worry too much about me. Okay, but that said, a trigger for me is getting interrupted. I can get interrupted once or twice or three times, but if I'm getting interrupted a lot, it's weird, this like switch will flip and I go into dysregulation and then I can't think. And if I get dysregulated, it is so disruptive to my ability to work. And, I love my job. My job is hard. My job takes a lot of focus. There's a lot going on. We have a lot of people working at Crappy Childhood Fairy. I'm in charge. I'm creating all the content. I'm talking to people. I'm providing coaching. There's just like stuff going on all day. Like if I kind of check out for an hour, it costs all of us that hour. And so it's really important to me to kind of stay checked in and to stay regulated. So I'm glad I'm aware of this. So the interruptions can get to me. And if I notice it's happening, if I start to feel the frustration that I'm getting, I don't think anybody likes to get interrupted, certainly not a lot. But this thing where I start to lose my ability to like cognitively put things together, if that happens, it's just like such a pain to have. So when I notice it happening, I come back and use my tools. For this, I use writing. And sometimes, I write my fears and resentments. That's a big part of what I do twice a day. But this other thing is when I'm trying to express myself and I'm not being heard or I'm getting interrupted, that's like this big theme. And I can see how it came from my childhood, but whatever, it doesn't matter where it came from. It's happening now. That sometimes I can just make a note to myself about the thing I wanted to say, because that's part of the frustration is, I kind of walk around with anxiety. I'll forget what it is. Like, oh, I thought of something. I want to say it. I really want to express this. So I write it down and I can say it later or remember to follow up on it later. And that's like really calming to me. I also keep paper by the bed. So if I wake up in the middle of the night, this is not really a trigger thing, but I guess in a sense it is. I wake up and I'm like, oh, I've got to send that check to so-and-so or whatever, contact the accountant, or I think of these things and I have paper so I can scribble it over there in the middle of the night because otherwise it'll keep me up. Just like, oh no, I'll forget tomorrow. It's just kind of free-floating anxiety, but that's what the writing is for. It's like out of my head, onto the paper, back to sleep. All right, here's another big trigger, buying things. I really don't do well in department stores, especially chaotic, noisy ones, or farmers markets, or that kind of environment, or buying large purchases, like the internet is like such a gift to somebody like me. And my car, there's this service where I live, and you can shop for the car online, and then they'll bring it to you to test drive. And I did that. I did a lot of research online. And I had them bring me a car and I bought it and I love my car. It worked out really well. And I never had to like go to a car lot or deal with the salesman. That works so well for me. I mean, I'm not against salesmen. It's just that when I'm under pressure that I have to spend money. And I think this has to do with growing up poor. I used to, like if I had to buy a pair of shoes, it would have to be the shoes that would fit every need that I had for the next 2 years. And the pressure was huge. And so this weird pressure comes up. And in department stores, I can last for about an hour, or malls. I'll last for about an hour. There's something about, I don't know, the smells, the fibers, the lights, and the noise chaos. I just start getting like woozy. I can't handle it. I get dehydrated. and I want to go, and I go with, and because I don't want to leave empty-handed, because I need something, I end up just impulse buying something, and I don't like what I got. So I tend to go shopping by myself when I need clothes, and I'll get a whole bunch of things at once and try not to go very often. That's my style. All right. Number 8 is feeling left out. I think that's hard for everybody, but I don't like feeling left out. When I feel not invited, not included, I'm not in on the secret or something, that one still gets to me every now and then. It happens. Number 9 is feeling unprepared or sloppy in a professional environment. Like when I did my first webinar last month, I did a webinar on work and CPTSD where all of a sudden Zoom crapped out and I just got cut off from the whole thing and I had to call back in. And luckily my team was like, Anna, we'll be back. And I came back, but it dysregulated me. And it's funny because I lead large Zoom meetings with a couple hundred people quite often. But in this case, I knew that some of the people had paid for it, and I felt really responsible for it being a great experience and for feeling like value for money. And part of that is, this will be quality. I will know what I'm talking about. You can just sit back and learn. And then I just got cut off the phone call and had to dial back into my own call. I don't know, probably you can relate to that. All right, so number 11 is getting ridiculed or put down in front of a group. Getting ridiculed or put down, or having those things double bad, is doing it in front of other people. And I am a total goofus. I love making jokes. I love making fun of myself. But the way that I grew up, sometimes I was made fun of in a way that really hurt. They thought that I was too rigid or serious. And honestly, I was, when I was a little kid, I was living in an extremely chaotic environment where people were on drugs and people were coming and going and different men and just all over the place. If I was rigid and kind of like a worrywart, that is correct. But I was made fun of for that. And so that's kind of the theme when people are like, oh God, you're being so controlling. It'll sort of trigger this old thing. And honestly, that's just one of the things that I just go, oh, there it is. It's a trigger. I don't feel like I get more than my share of that. Well, a little bit, if you go on YouTube and just start telling your true stories on YouTube like I'm doing right now, you're going to get these comments that are, shaming or making fun of you or something. But it's strangers on YouTube. And what does it say about somebody that they just attack people online? It's just so lame. But it can hurt sometimes. It can hurt. Here's another one, opinion bullies. I just did a video about this. Opinion bullies are people who really believe they're right and they get in your face and they tell you what you have to believe and they fight with you about it. And I think that I'm just like everybody else from this last decade where it's really gotten out of hand and people can be quite cruel about it. But the part that's hard for me is I'm pretty thoughtful and discreet, where I have opinions where I think it might be divisive or uncomfortable for people. I don't bring them up in groups. In our membership program, we have a few cardinal rules. It's you don't get to discuss politics here. You can do that everywhere else on the internet, but politics is not relevant for what we're doing here. And then we have a no giving direct advice. And so I'm going to throw that in. When people give me direct advice, it is a trigger for me. I don't like it. It kind of interferes with my brain waves, especially when it's about my health. When I had some serious medical stuff going on and everybody got in there and was giving me all their conflicting personal idea of what I had to do, I hated it. And when you're trying to heal a serious health thing, talk about you're actually communing with your nervous system and you're bringing it forward into being able to function again. That's really what's going on when you're healing. So I really don't like people getting involved in that. And I can get very irritated and start withdrawing from people quite badly. That's a trigger. I don't want to be sensitive like that. And hopefully, I haven't been sick in a long time to test it. So that one. But opinion bullies, where people are they hate you, or they say hateful things about people where I'm they're talking about me, but they just don't know that I'm one of those people. That is very triggering for me. And It's funny because like my husband is completely fine with that. He just doesn't take it personally at all. He doesn't even care if people think that. He doesn't even judge them if they feel that way about other people. But he thinks it's just because I'm female. I don't know. But I'm just like, they don't like me. If they really knew me, they wouldn't like me. They don't know what I really think. I just want to be over that. I have a fantasy that when I'm 90 years old, I'm going to be so fine with how everybody has opinions, and I'll just be like, I just love everybody. I just love everybody. That's where I'm trying to head with that. You know, you've heard that saying, opinions are like, you know what, holes. Everybody has one, right? All right. Here's another one. This is a trigger for me, and this is street fairs. I hate street fairs. I hate the food. I hate the music. I hate the crowds. I hate the prospect of trying to look at something you might want to buy, because I don't like buying things because it's really stressful for me. Like the whole setup of a street fair is just like totally sensory overload for me. And I don't like them. And I would just like to ask, how come street fairs don't have very good music ever, and who picks that music anyway, and why, and how you can hear two bands at the same time and it's terrible sound, like all that stuff. I'm very sensitive to like bad sound. And so street fairs, one of the biggest street fairs in the world is near my house, like 5 blocks away every year, and I haven't been in like a decade, like, ugh. Very yucky for me. Okay, here's one, and this is kind of related to street fair, but it's like, loud music that reminds me of the 70s drug scene, because in the early 70s, I was living in a commune as a little kid, and that music and the sort of aesthetic of the whole thing, but that like, I don't know, that negative, nihilistic music really bums me out. It feels evil to me. And I know it's not inherently evil, but it's associated with stuff that was evil that was going on in my home at the time. So that could be part of the street fair thing, and also why I'm like, when are they going to update their choice of bands so it's not like 70s drug scene music? I'm saying, you know, apologies to those of you who play that kind of music or love it. Like, I get it. I like what I like. All right, here's another trigger. This one is also related to the commune thing. The smell of health food stores, and I mean the co-op kind that smells like a mix of curry, henna, and something sour, and also fermented vegetables or something. That smell of health food stores like immediately makes me feel depressed. I know where it comes from. Here's one. Public nudity. I did a post like very early in Crappy Childhood Fairy. It's not even a video, and it's called Feeling Naked. It was a blog post, and maybe I'll bring it out sometime. But growing up in a commune, I was pressured all the time to run around naked with the other kids, and I never felt safe, and I never felt okay. And then as a young adult, you were supposed to be really cool at hot tubs and rivers and stuff. And then when I actually got into 12-step recovery, one of the first things that happened when I was encouraged and supported and using my daily practice to start just getting completely honest with myself, I'm like, I hate that. And now I don't do it anymore. I do whatever I want. So I don't have to do it. And honestly, I'm not that comfortable when other people are doing it. No judgment. I'm just not comfortable. And yeah, you can see where that came from too. All right, here's one. I think everybody has this. People yelling at me. Boy, do I not like that. Boy, does that upset me. We had this thing happen. Kara, who is the community manager of our members, we were taking a day trip together with our husbands. We went up to Napa, and we went to this food court place to get lunch. And we were pulling into a parking space, and some lady in an SUV starts honking and like screaming at us. And I guess she thought it was her parking place, and you know, I'm quite sure we were there for a very long time waiting for that space, and she had just pulled in, but whatever, you know, the screaming, cursing. And then we went in, and of course I was having a meltdown of paranoia and fear because of the way, it's just like, again, this is the most you're going to hear me talk about how I grew up, but people screaming and yelling often went to violence. And so I sort of go into this place where I'm like expecting violence any minute. Well, guess what? The lady comes up behind my husband and starts bashing him with a baby stroller. Yeah, okay, I'm judging that. I am judging that. I mean, bashing a man with your baby is just insane. And then she went in, she jostled him on purpose and slammed into him. And he ended up talking to her with his kind, gentle voice, like, why are you doing that? Well, we were actually waiting. And I think she ended up sort of melting and going, oh, I'm sorry. And she walked away. And that worked out. But I was there. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I was just like, I was on high vigilance about this. But it turns out that wasn't totally crazy. All right, I'm getting towards the later parts of the triggers that I'm aware of. One is, and this is just like a physical trigger, and I've talked about this before, but if I eat sugary, floury food, especially in the morning, I'm going to have trouble staying regulated through the day. Like part of staying neurologically regulated, it's just a total physical thing. It's not just emotional. It's not just experiential. It's what I put in my mouth. And eating protein and keeping the sugary flour stuff kind of away really helps me kind of stay regulated. It's just, I can pay attention, I'm focused, my emotions are just kind of humming along and, responsive to what's going on around me and not just kind of, feeling too much, just thinking about stuff that's off topic all the time. Who needs it? All right, here's one. Being woken up too many times. I can take it once or twice, but, when it happens like 15 times, not so good. And it'll make me really angry and kind of bring on an emotional flashback. I was very lucky. My two kids were I co-slept with them and they were just calm. And, I really got to sleep pretty well with that. But there's other circumstances, noisy neighbors, people who snore, that kind of thing that can really make it hard for me to sleep. All right, another one. Fearing someone is mad at me or talking behind my back. I'm getting over that. And this one gets me in the morning. I'm vulnerable in the morning, but I wake up in the morning often and just see what have people been writing on the YouTube channel. Sometimes there's just a comment sitting there like a turd waiting for me, and I see it and I'm like, oh, there it is. Don't get dysregulated. Don't get dysregulated. Don't get dysregulated. But it makes me mad. And sometimes I'd really like to just come back hard at those people, but there's never a point. I'll just give you a heads up right now. There's just very little point in ever responding to people who are bullies and jerks and who put you down online. And luckily, if it's your channel, you can just remove their comments or hide them from the channel. So if people are really abusive to me or anybody else, that's what I do. And but it doesn't quite have the satisfaction of really telling them a piece of your mind. So, but if I were to do that, that would even be more dysregulating. So it's for my sake as well as theirs, as well as the community, that I just don't do that. So finally, the last one is having conversations about complex issues like the news or personal finance or what do we have to do at work today? Because, my husband runs the operations now of the business. And so in the morning, first thing in the morning, sometimes he'll be like, oh, I've got a lot on my mind. Let's talk about it. I'll go, wait. I have to do my daily practice first. And I'm not just being picky. If I try to take on something that involves a deep thinking and stress before I've written my fears and resentments and meditated, I can almost never get back to my ideal focus. So that's kind of the cardinal rule. And I go to my little space and I go do my daily practice. I'm always talking about this, but if you have any of these triggers I have, if you want to learn how to calm them, this is what I did. I learned a specific writing technique and a simple meditation. They go together. I teach them in a free course. They're always down in the description section. It's there freestanding, called the Daily Practice. It's also on the free tools page of my website. The free tools page is linked in the description section as well. I'm just sort of throwing it in your face all the time, but it can really be helpful. So I go do that in the morning all by myself, and then I come out and then I can talk. And so those are the 22 triggers that are still active in me. And one day I hope to tell you I have a few less and hopefully no new ones.